Hello rowers, this is Travis, back for another training talk, and we're going to talk about kind of a favorite subject of mine today. We are going to talk about the value of sliders for the static Concept 2 and dynamic ergs in general, alright? And when I talk about dynamic ergs, I'm not talking about the branded dynamic erg that C2 produces, though that is what I would call a dynamic erg. When I am saying dynamic erg, I'm saying any erg where the machine moves under you back and forth, and your body weight is going to remain fixed over a certain point on that ground. All right, so essentially it is a passive recovery motion, all right, where the machine is coming to you and then you're pushing that machine away, versus an active recovery motion, which is going to be characteristic of a stationary standard Concept 2 erg with no slides, where you are bringing your body weight forward and then pushing your body weight away through that drive cycle. And the reason that the dynamic erg is so valuable is twofold, all right? And we're going to talk on that. First one is related to if you're an on-the-water rower, the recovery motion on the water is a passive recovery, all right? And so it's corollary to what's happening on a dynamic erg. It is not corollary to what's happening on a standard erg, all right? In the boat, once you have established your body angle, and as soon as you, well, ideally once you've established your body angle, but as soon as you unlock the legs, all right, and you basically allow the seat to move towards the feet, you should not be pulling yourself forward, all right? The boat, the momentum of the boat should be moving the boat under you, all right, and you're preparing for that catch position, and then when you get to that full catch position, you set your oar and you leverage the boat past you again, all right? But it's a dynamic system on the water, all right? So there's a couple things. You have the whole system of you and the boat that's moving across the water. You have yourself within the boat, so the boat is moving, and sometimes you're moving back with the boat, and sometimes you're moving in the opposite direction of where the boat is moving. But ideally, from an outside frame of reference, is that if you're in that boat and you set and you pry that boat forward as you're going through the drive, and then as soon as you set that angle and release your legs, then you, from an outside perspective, should remain pretty much in the same place, and the boat should move under you, and then you leverage, and then you leverage, and then you're both moving forward again, and then you set, and then the boat moves under you independently, and then you get to the catch, and then the cycle continues. All right, so hopefully my example there gave you an idea of what is happening in the boat. But the key takeaway there is that you are never pulling the boat towards you, all right? That is a horrible habit to get into if you're rowing on the water, and that's a habit that is going to be engendered by rowing on a stationary erg, all right? And it's something that coaches are going to really struggle with, or even novice rowers that are just trying to teach themselves are really going to struggle with the balance of really pulling themselves forward and essentially rowing at too high a rate all the time, especially too high rates proportional to the amount of power that they're producing on the drive, and being relaxed and just kind of letting it flow and minimizing the amount of muscles that you're using through the stroke cycle, especially during the return to the catch, during that recovery phase. And so for those athletes that are training on land, it's to their great advantage to maximize the amount of time they're spending on a dynamic rowing machine, whether that's a Concept 2, standard Concept 2 on sliders, whether it's a dynamic Concept 2, whether it's the RowPerfect, whether it's an Ortex slider, whether it's whatever it might be that's out there on the market, that spending time on land training that passive recovery action rather than the active recovery action moving forward is going to be advantageous to developing the skills that you need as you transfer back onto the water. Now, there are always going to be exceptions to that, all right? So for me, especially when I'm teaching novice athletes, I would not put them right away on the dynamic erg. And that relates a lot to the fact that I really make heavy use of pause drills when I'm teaching rowers. So I use those pauses to ensure athletes are in the correct position in the stroke before moving to the next position, the next part of the stroke. And you can't, on a dynamic erg, you can't be pausing all the time, all right? Because the dynamic erg requires an equilibrium of motion in order to settle into the range that's available. And if you're stopping, then it's basically causing the machine and the system to shift to accommodate that new center of mass, and then once you start rowing again, it's going to be out of its equilibrium and you're going to hit either the front or the back. All right, and so you can't be doing pause drills on those dynamic ergs. And also, rowers do have this natural tendency to want to pull themselves into the front end, and so I tend to keep athletes on a standard stationary erg until they've developed the ability to relax and control their motion into the front end, because if I put them onto the slides is going to exaggerate any bad habits that the athlete has as they go into a system where it's even easier to pull themselves forward. I also will not put people on a dynamic erg who have issues with body control and body angle, especially coming into the front end. If you are not good at establishing a body angle and then maintaining that body angle through the compression and the initial phase of the drive, then the dynamic erg is going to exacerbate that bad habit. All right, it's going to cause people to really kind of collapse their body into the front end because they're pulling themselves up. There's momentum. They don't have control of their body. They're really just kind of a victim of their own previously produced momentum. And so I will keep them on a stationary erg until I know they have good body control, until they have good slide control, and anytime that we know we're not going to be using any pause drills. But once I've established those things, I want to spend as much time as possible on the dynamic ergs. And the only thing that really limited me as a coach with using the dynamic ergs was space that was available, and just the kind of hazard of having a bunch of moving slides on the ground, because athletes, even great athletes, it blows my mind how oblivious and how clumsy they can be, and the last thing you want is people tripping over moving sharp metal objects when there's a bunch of kind of metal objects kind of those ergs, you know, positioned over the ground for them to fall on. And so we tried to put them in a place where we knew there was a lot of walking space, that it was very clear that the slides were there, that people wouldn't trip on. But from a pure coaching and performance side, if I could have put all my athletes on the Concept 2 slides, I would. Honestly, if I had unlimited budget, I would use a RowPerfect erg for all my athletes. So I'd have a couple dozen RowPerfects, but they cost about probably 4 times as much as a C2 once you include all of the kind of extras with the screen and the software and whatnot. And they're just not as resilient. You know, Concept 2 is really a commercial product, and RowPerfect is really kind of a niche product, and it's just not as sturdy as the Concept 2 rowing machine, even though it's kind of a higher quality feel for on the water rowers. So getting back away from that tangent, the value, if you are not an on the water rower, I still feel like there is incredible value in the dynamic erg, because I think that it is better for your body to not be producing momentum moving into the front end that you then have to overcome to change direction. If you allow the momentum to be isolated completely in an external system in that rower, then you are taking strain off your body and you're allowing your energy to go more effectively into producing impulse for that flywheel and for that erg. Clearly, if your goal is to go fast, then that is going to be important. And so even if you're not on the water, there are your performance benefits to rowing with dynamic, all right, because it's just a better rowing motion, all right. It's less stress on your body in the ways that are not going to help you be fit, and it allows you to focus your energy on the ways that will make you fit. And so you could be asking, well, why doesn't everybody use slides? And well, it's clear on the indoor rowing side, on the recreational side, why? Because it's easier, it's more mobile. The slides do require a little bit of effort of calibration and setting them in the right place and knowing how to set them so that, one, they're straight and they're not set at an angle where you're going to be bouncing off either side. Also, on the indoor rower without the slides, you can row with really bad technique and you're still going to be going back and forth. You can't row with really bad technique on the slides because it will disrupt the equilibrium of the system and you're going to be bouncing off either end or another. And so people that just aren't really skilled at rowing are not going to be able to have success and enjoy rowing on the sliders or rowing on a dynamic erg. And so if you're a commercial setting like a CrossFit or whatnot, where the erg is simply a training tool, just like your barbells or your power rope, then you don't want to make it more complicated. You don't want to make it more challenging for people at an introductory level to, accept and embrace that training tool. And so that makes sense of why you're not using it. Now, if you're going to why doesn't the rowing world embrace the dynamic erg, that is as a question that I struggle with on a regular basis. I don't understand it. I think it is just kind of being stuck in the past and on tradition. I think a lot of coaches, they have years and years of data on a stationary erg, and in their mind, the dynamic erg is going to produce different data. And even if that were true, and I'll talk about that kind of in a moment of whether your performance is going to differ between the stationary and dynamic, who cares? Like, you have a training tool that is clearly more valuable for developing the skills you're going to need on the water, and you're staying on an indoor rower because you don't want to disrupt the data, or you don't want to interfere with your ability to compare current data with past data. Come on, make the sacrifice. That's absolutely absurd. And I really, other than convenience and cost, I don't really know what other reasons people would have to not embrace dynamic ergs. And I think a lot of people kind of at the elite level are starting to do it. Certainly other more open-minded national team systems do use the dynamic ergs exclusively, and eventually the rest of the world will catch on. But honestly, this was kind of a phenomenon that we should have caught on a decade and a half ago, of the value of training on dynamic ergs and transferring our database of knowledge or of training data from the stationary to the dynamic. And then that goes into, I'll take a step back and to say then the colleges don't want to make that transition because the elite athletes aren't doing it. And then the high school don't want to do it because the colleges aren't doing it. And as someone who spent a lot of time training youth athletes and training them to perform on the water, and using what tools were available on land, that we wrote on slides because that was what was going to create a better performance on the water. And I don't care so much about what your numbers are on the indoor rower if you're not able to produce speed on the water. But still, there would be college coaches that are like, oh, I don't want you to be sending in test scores that are on slides. And so I've got to disrupt my training to prepare the athlete to perform on the water, just so some jack-off college coach that can't accept the performance erg score on slides, wants them to go and hop on a stationary. And you can say, well, just hop on the stationary and do it. But it's disruptive. It's disruptive to the training. So I have feelings, all right? I have feelings about that subject, if you can't tell. But it's absurd. I think it's really holding back our sport, this not embracing this additional training. So I think that a stationary rower with no dynamic action, whether it's sliders or whether it's a RowPerfect dynamic erg, those stationary machines, they have their benefit in the sport. But if you're training for on the water, like, get with the times is what I would say. I was like, move on. If you can get slides, if you have the space, you have the money, then you should do it. And then the other argument that I'll hear is that your numbers are going to be different, your performance is different. And on some level, that is true. If you're taking an elite athlete rowing in let's say a 30, 32 or below, I do not think that there is going to be a difference between their performance on the slides versus off of the slides, all right? Because when you're rowing at rates in those ranges, you don't have to pull yourself forward hard enough to really kind of take energy away from your ability to produce impulse on the drive. And so it's really not going to create a performance boost for a highly skilled athlete. Now, for a less skilled athlete, sure, if their lack of skill is centered around not being able to bring themselves forward relaxed, and they're just pulling themselves forward and they're wasting energy pulling themselves forward, then if you put them on a dynamic erg where they don't have to pull themselves forward, then that will allow them then to get forward and save some of that energy and put it then into the drive, all right? But your problem there is the skill of the athlete. It's not the static versus dynamic. And you as a coach got some work to do, so focus where you should be focusing, not on just keeping them confined to a stationary erg because you haven't taught them how to use their energy more efficiently on the drive. The other issues is when you start to jack that rate higher, right? So when you start to get into the mid to the high 30s, certainly once you're into the 40s and above, then the stationary erg and that need to pull yourself forward and then to stop that momentum and move in the other direction, that is going to start to take exponentially more energy as you move that stroke rate up. And that energy that you're putting into that is going to take away from the energy that is available for creating impulse on the drive. And so there is going to be then a benefit, slight benefit in your performance, going on that stationary. Is it going to manifest in a lot of split difference? I think that the benefit is small. I think you're talking about tenths of a split over the course of a testing piece, over a middle distance testing piece for an elite level athlete, and that is not significant if all of your training data is coming from that dynamic environment. And again, it also depends on the athlete. It depends on the strengths and weaknesses of the athlete, particularly on the weaknesses of the athlete. If the dynamic erg allows them to kind of gloss over the weaknesses that are going to hold them back on the stationary, then sure, they're going to perform well on the slides. But honestly, on the other hand, if you have an athlete with a lot of habits that are disruptive to creating a good equilibrium on a dynamic, they're not going to be able to perform well on that dynamic erg as well as they will on the stationary. So it goes a little bit of both ways. But certainly when you're testing, and if the static or the dynamic erg makes it easier to get that stroke rate up, then that is going to benefit your performance, because ultimately stroke rate is the dominant factor in speed over, you have length, you have stroke rate, you have power that you're producing, all right? And if you can maintain those other two and increase your cadence, your stroke rate, then your performance is going to increase. Whereas that's not, it's not the same level of improvement if you're increasing your power per stroke or you're increasing your length, all right? So, again, so I'll review that real quick. So stroke length, pressure on the stroke, and cadence are going to be the three factors determining your speed. If you increase cadence and maintain power per stroke and stroke length, you're going to get a large boost in your speed. If you create a proportion, if you increase your length and maintain your cadence and your power, and you're increasing your length in a way that's using the same amount of energy that you would have put into a increase in cadence, then you're gonna get a smaller increase in boat speed. And you may even get worse, because increasing length to an artificial length is not a great idea in rowing. And then if you just increase your power per stroke, keeping your cadence and your stroke length the same, and you're just decreasing the amount of time that you're taking to move through the drive, again, if you're using the same amount of energy to do that as you were using to increase the stroke rate, the benefit in boat speed that you're going to get is not as great as it would be if you had used that energy to increase your cadence and your rhythm. All right, so all that being said, it is advantageous to increase your cadence and row at that higher cadence in a racing effort. And so the dynamic is going to facilitate that. For me, a lot of my training in the last year or so has been focused on short sprints, just because I have more fun with that. It's more interesting. It's something new, so it keeps me engaged. And the rowing world doesn't really understand how to sprint, and so the challenge of kind of reworking and recreating training methodology based on the needs of the sprint versus middle distance training has been fun and engaging for me. And so and the slides have been kind of the way for me to do that, because a lot of that training is done at stroke rates in the 40s, and rowing in the 40s on a slides allows me to maintain my natural length, allows me to stay very relaxed and row how I would row a 45, a 50 stroke rate if I was in a single or an 8 on the water. Whereas if I was on a stationary erg, the effort that it takes to pull myself forward at that stroke rate is so great. It honestly feels like I'm having a seizure on the erg. You definitely have to shorten your stroke in order to get that stroke rate much above 40s. And that's not fun to me. So I don't really do it. I might hop on a stationary erg to try to go for some records just once I've created a lot of fitness on the slides, but that's not where I'm gonna put my training focus because I don't enjoy it, all right? It's not a fun motion for me as a rower that has a background, an extensive background with on the water performance. But those are all my thoughts on the dynamic erg. I think that everybody that can be training on one should. There are some considerations to take when you're doing it to make sure that you're taking full advantage of it, and certainly dynamic is going to punish some bad habits, and so we'll expose those bad habits for you, which is a good thing if assuming that you have coaching and somebody to help guide you to what those habits are so that you can make the appropriate suggestions. On that note, if you guys haven't followed or haven't seen, I do have a website. It's not my job, my business, but it is a website that I set up to allow me to make some income coaching and helping out athletes that are interested. I'm really not interested in gym model of just getting as many clients as I can and helping them and hoping they don't actually show up and do the work and they just pay me. I only want to work with athletes that really want to do the work and want to improve and want to invest themselves in the process. And I set up my website, GTS Rowing, so that those people had a venue to connect with me and to engage me with those services so that we can work together. So if you are interested, if you believe in a lot of the things I've been talking about and you're engaged and you think that I can help you with your own rowing performance, then visit gtsrowing.com. There are links down below in the description, and see if there's some way that I can help you with that. There's even little consultation calls there where you're not even making a long-term commitment. You're just setting up a 30, a 60, or 90-minute phone call just to pick my brain and ask questions about your specific challenges and training, things that you should be doing, your experiences, and we can kind of spitball back and forth to try to figure out what you can do to go a little faster. So check that out if you're interested. I will love to help you. I'm always happy to work with athletes that are really genuinely interested in getting faster and aren't just looking for kind of a cookie cutter training program that they found on Reddit or on the internet search or whatever. All right, so that's my pitch there. If you found this helpful, please give it a like. It does help YouTube kind of spread the word to people that aren't finding this channel naturally. You can subscribe if you aren't already and you enjoy this content and you want some more. If you have questions, throw them in the comments below. I've been really good lately about answering those comments. I've had enough time to do it. The comments, certainly any comments that I find enhance the quality of the lessons that I'm talking about, I am happy to respond to those, hoping that people read them and it can further facilitate their understanding of the topic that I'm going over in these videos. So that's it. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you listening as always and your support for these talks and the channel. Good luck with your training, and I'll catch you on the next video. Bye.